was asked to come on and kind of explain who I am and all of that. So hopefully this won't be too long. Here we go. I guess we can start with my name. My name is Nana Boadu Amwa. I like how that sounds. I was born and raised in the DMV, Virginia, Maryland, DC. I'm a New Yorker by heart. I come from West Africa at a time where the UK was present. I come from a country called Ghana in West Africa, around the Accra, Kumasi region, the Asante people. The language is Twi, T-W-I. But I was born in America. And for the first few years of my life, I traveled back and forth from Ghana to America. And then once I started schools around 6 years old, preschool, kindergarten, I stayed primarily in the United States. Professionally, I am an actor. But I started my career as a dancer. And I started working with my mother first, and then my father. My mother had an importing and exporting business. She had a boutique in the United States. She would go to Ghana and Europe and collect all these beautiful artifacts, clothing, high fashion designs, and bring them back to America and sell them to friends and relatives missing back home and all types of things like that. My father was the president of an organization called the Asante Kotoko Association. My mother was the first lady. And being his son and being named after him, it was my responsibility to dance, if that makes sense. My sister was cast first, and then I was cast, and my older brother was cast as well. But it was pretty much this dance group with myself, my sister, and about 9 or so of my cousins, all girls. There was a singer who was like a vocalist. There was a band of drummers and percussionists, African, djembe, all of that. Sometimes there was a choir. Most of the time we danced to a backing track, and it was Hyatt Regency hotel ballrooms. It was the Ghana Embassy in DC. And this is all before, I even hit puberty. This is 10, 11, 12 years old. But within America alone, I was the kid that was at all the school dances, dancing in the middle, grinding on girls. I was the kid that was doing all the talent shows, that was on all the dance teams and step teams, that as soon as the music videos came on television, I was trying to emulate them and learn the choreography and all of that. And so growing up, there was a lot of artists, entertainers, people that really impacted me, had an influence on me. I grew up watching things like the Apollo and Soul Train Awards, the Soul Train. I was so big into talent shows and getting discovered that way, and showcases and talent shows and dance competitions and step competitions hosted by local radio personalities and DJs and performers and things like that. I was heavily influenced by Motown, heavily influenced by Tina Turner, heavily influenced by James Brown. But there probably wasn't anyone that had a greater impact on my life than Michael Jackson and Janet Jackson. Michael Jackson, for me, was like this supernova by the time I was born, and I could actually process it. My father had the Bad record, the Thriller record, and I remember listening to the vinyl. I remember watching the videos on MTV and all of that. Way after the fact. I was born in '89. And I just remember seeing, I didn't know what it was that Michael Jackson actually did. At this time, acting, dancing, singing weren't really considered professions. I don't know what he was doing, but dance spoke loudest to me. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to be. I just didn't know how to do it. And for me, Michael Jackson was so great because he was so soulful. He was such a humanitarian. He let everything go and he expressed himself and he left his heart on the floor. And at a time when you're growing up as a black boy in the DMV and they tell you all you could be is a rapper, ball player, drug dealer, when you see, pop culture references to Rodney King or riots in California and all these different types of things like that, you grow up with a limited mindset of what it is that you can do and what you can be. I didn't grow up in a space where I was being told in America. Now, Africa might have been different, but in America, I didn't grow up in a space where I was being told I could be a doctor or a lawyer. I was being told I was remedial, that I couldn't read, that I had to be held back a grade, and so many different things like that. And so Michael Jackson was the antithesis to all of that. He wasn't, tatted up. He wasn't getting arrested, shooting up the place, doing all types of drugs and things like that. He was a positive influence on my life, and he gave me an image of what I wanted to be, that it forced me to not engage or indulge in a lot of the things that growing up young people get hooked onto. I knew that if I was to smoke or to get a girl pregnant or whatever the case may be at a young age, I wouldn't reach my potential. And so I didn't engage in those type of things. But still, growing up in Virginia, Michael Jackson he wasn't attainable. Janet Jackson, however, was more grounded. She felt more familiar. She felt more like the girl next door. And I always knew, ever since I was a kid, I had the biggest crush on her. I loved her. I knew we were married from the first sight I saw. For the first time I laid eyes on her, I was like, man. So yeah. And for my entire life, she's always been like a guardian angel for me, protecting me, being my eyes and my ears, and keeping me straight, So I'm rambling now, but I was very much the kid doing all the talent shows and all those type of things like that. Eventually, I hear about a thing called the National Forensic League through a coach. I don't want to do too much name dropping because I want to respect people's position, but there was basically a category called dramatic interpretation, dramatic performance, and it provided me opportunity to win a trophy. It provided me opportunity to express myself in another form that I never thought I could. Not just in sports or academic, but just like acting. And ended up doing pretty well. I won a couple national championships and stuff like that. And in that, I was influenced by a video by a coach in California. His name is Tommy Lindsay. And there was a student by the name of Pierre Clark who did this amazing dramatic interpretation, and he was featured on Oprah Winfrey Show. If you don't know anything about the National Forensic League, Oprah Winfrey did it, Kelsey Grammer did it, Michael Urie did it. A lot of influential people growing up were a part of it. And at least for me, when I was going through, those are the people I was most aware of who had done it. And it was an opportunity. And through that, I was introduced to a young senator from Chicago in his Democratic National Convention speech, who would later go on to become who we all know as President Barack Obama. Through that, I ended up starting to do plays and musicals, which got me into Virginia Governor School, where I was introduced to the Dance Theater of Harlem and learned from Lorraine Graves, a former principal dancer of the Dance Theater of Harlem. And that afforded me the opportunity to go to college, where I went to University of Virginia and studied drama and dance and worked with people like Bill T. Jones of the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Dance Company. And gave me the opportunity to hear Maya Angelou's first person account of Why the Caged Bird Sings. Gave me the opportunity to listen to a lecture from Julian Bond. Gave me the opportunity to do so many different things. And eventually I would travel to DC and work with Ralph Glenmore, with Alvin Ailey for performing with Judith Jamison, and continue to build relationships with them. Also at University of Virginia, I was working on the radio, 92.7 KISS FM. I was an on-air personality and the director of music research. And then everything kind of changed. My superhero, Michael Jackson, passed away. And there was this huge void in the industry. More than just the concerts or the shows, but a void that needed to be filled. And I was being called upon to fill it. At this time, I couldn't really sing, but I had the credentials to get the bag, and that's what they needed. There were a lot of people that could fill Michael Jackson's spot, fill his shoes, I guess. There was a conversation going on, oh, Beyonce could do it, Usher could do it, Justin Timberlake could do it, Chris Brown could do it, Rihanna could do it, et cetera, et cetera. But everybody was going through some type of legal issue that it caused complications. And I was the only one with the credit, with the credibility, that was free enough to walk in and walk out. Like a whisper in the wind. I remember at the time there were conversations about Beyonce, but there was issues with Destiny's Child and all that they were going through. Then there was Chris Brown, but there was issues with Rihanna and all of that they were going through. Then there was conversations about Justin Timberlake, but then there was this idea, people were still a little iffy because of the Super Bowl and Janet Jackson situation. And, people didn't know if they could like Justin without disrespecting Janet in some capacity. There were conversations about so many other people, but it was just ended up falling on me. I remember I was in a ballroom, one event space in Blackburn at Howard University. And we were talking about how we measure the success of a record today in 2020, whatever, in the new millennium or whatever. This is after digital downloads and people leaking songs and all different types of things like that, or people having the hardest time ever getting their song on the record, on the radio. How do we measure measure the success of the song. And it's 360. I remember we're talking about YouTube, we're talking about Miley Cyrus, we're talking about Justin Timberlake, and I was talking to Live Nation and Creative Artists Agency, and they were basically like, you need to go on tour. And the first stop on the tour was supposed to be Mrs. Carter's show. And Mrs. Carter's World Tour, or whatever that show was that Beyonce was doing. But it ended up being Salt and Pepper at the Howard Theater. And that started everything. Usher Raymond ended up putting me on to the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, and I became a writer. Trey Songz put me on to publishing, and I became a publisher. I think it was, I want to say it was Missy Elliott that got me into copyrights. There was just this is getting long, I'm so sorry. There was just this time, around this time, in Hollywood, there was this conversation about there not being good roles for people of color. And I refused to settle for that defeatist narrative. I remember how hard it was all the time as an actor trying to find that right monologue or trying to find that right piece to represent my skills or what it is that I could do. And so at some point I just decided, I don't know if it was the spirit of Maya Angelou within me or whatever the case may be, I just ended up starting to write those roles that I wanted to see on screen, on stage, the songs that I wanted to hear. And writing became my form of expression. It became my second love. It became my mistress to dance. With dance, I always needed music. With writing, I could be the music. And so I was free to express myself unlimited with the written word. And so I did. At this time, I wrote When Black Doesn't Bruise So Purple, a stage play. I wrote Shakur, major motion picture. I wrote Study Abroad, an independent film. I was exploring for the first time the ideas of what it meant to be Black. And I was exploring for the first time my sexuality. What I found was how I grew up thinking that African American and Black were synonymous was untrue. What I found was to be Black in America meant to be the red wine stain on the plush white carpet. You can blot it with club soda, you can clean it, you can replace the carpet, but no matter what you do, you will always remember what happened here. And that's what it means to be Black in America. Being Black in America is the stain to the Constitution, the constitutional promise of this country. The idea of freedom is always and forever will be plagued by the realization that at some point in time, we owned slaves. We were slaves. And that's what it means to be Black. And that's hard for me because I didn't grow up with that, but others did. And I had to figure out how to navigate in this space with those that did. I began writing and eventually I began touring, and I made a lot of money with publishing and writing. I ended up writing 3 a.m., which today is still the highest grossing album of all time. It's a musical, and it took over 20 years to make. I think it is the best representation of me, who I am in its entirety. If you really dissect it and really apply all the principles, all the little nuances that I said, it's me. That's hard for me to say because I'm so much of a method actor. I like to transform. I don't like to show who I really am in real life. And who I am in real life is like, I'm just a kid that likes to smile, that likes to laugh. You know what I'm saying? Watch a good cartoon show all day here, so and just chill, keep things low key. Don't gotta do, but that's not always artistically cool. So, eventually what ended up happening was I did a lot of philanthropic work, humanitarian work, initiatives for the arts, eradicating poverty, combating HIV/AIDS, all different types of things like that. And the pandemic happened, and everything kind of stopped. And the only thing that was speaking to me loud enough that I could hear and understand what it was saying was dance. And what I found was I never felt out of love with dance. I just realized that if I was to be who it is that I, since I was a kid, knew that I should be, I would have to navigate some way into sound. Because you see, sound travels further than sight. Even though I was always trained to extend my limbs all the way to the rafters, to the nosebleed seats, as they call it, to the people who, work a 9-to-5 job, 18-hour days, who sacrificed, their lights getting turned off for their last meal just to come and see the show and spend a $30 ticket. Even though I was trained to extend and project to them, even though I was trained to perform and project my voice into the lobby, into the hallways, into the garages, so that anybody and everybody who needed this moment can feel and have that. I always knew that sound travels further than sight. And so I had to learn how to dance vocally. Just as I dance with the written word, I had to learn how to dance vocally. I had to speak up, which was hard because so much of my life was like a silent film. As you can see, I don't have an African accent, but I have an African name. And I don't speak Tree, I speak English. So I grew up hearing African music and the drums and instrumentations and all of those things. But I couldn't speak back. So it was like a silent film my entire life. So to find my voice in all of this meant spending a lot of time in isolation, a lot of time in the dark. Otherwise, I'm like a sponge and I end up soaking up everybody else's stuff, everybody else's floods. What everybody else feels black is, I start to take that in. What it means to be a man, what it means to be young, what it means. I can't be them. I can only live in my own skin. And so dance started speaking loudest to me, and eventually I started making my way back to the stage, but this time with ballet, where I started. I began training with the Washington Ballet. Um, I spent a lot of time in the Kennedy Center. Um, the idea initially that I got from my agency was that they wanted me to go to New York and audition for the American Ballet Theater to play the role of Prince, the Prince and Giselle, opposite Misty Copeland, which was a huge feat because I was like, I'm not that good of a ballet dancer. And she's a singer, but I had to stop for a second and think about my resume and all of the women of color that I've in some way danced opposite against. Janet Jackson, Beyonce, Judith Jamison, Lorraine Graves. I had to think about these women, Debbie Allen, and it just seemed like it fit. And so that's where I find myself now. I never did anything that I ever did for money. I did it for survival. I did it because I had this longing within myself that I needed to express myself. Because when you grow up in a world and you're constantly under this umbrella, you don't ever really know reality. And if you step out of this umbrella and you get into reality, it's like you have to walk on eggshells because the slightest thing is real, is final, is definite. And one day you could be here and the other day you could be in a whole different world. And that's scary when you're alone in this world, like I am, all the time. And so I found dance again. And it's difficult because I'm in a different space. It's like I'm coming back from injury and I have to learn how to walk again and talk again and move again. I have to relearn everything. It's exciting. It's scary. But I see the progress and I am so amazed at the progress when I make the progress. So yeah. In a nutshell, I guess to conclude, my name is Nana Boudouamwa. I am an actor. I feel as though my purpose in this life, in this world, is to help you, my Black people, find, take back, and keep your righteous mind. Because somewhere along the line, we've lost it. Somewhere along the line, we drank the Kool-Aid and believed the wrong story. I feel as though it's my job and my responsibility to remind you that you are not inferior. You are not included. You are not permitted to sit at the seat of the table. Not because you are inferior, but because the person occupying the seat never owned the seat, and thus never had the ability to determine whether you could sit there or not. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm saying that you were omitted from the Constitution not because you were a slave, but because you were not owned by the colony. You come from kings. You were an extension of the king. You come from castles, not prisons. You were not a criminal. You were a descendant of royalty. And I feel it's my responsibility to bring that realization to the masses. I don't know. Maybe I'm being overly dramatic. Maybe I didn't articulate that the best way. Maybe I'll go back and I'll try to figure some shit, some shit out. We'll figure it out. I don't know. But yeah, I'm an actor, and I write the stories that touch humanity and force us to take a good look at ourselves and ask questions. So that's a little bit of a nutshell about my life. That cover everything. I covered, my name. I covered I came from Africa, my upbringing in America and Africa. I covered, the talent shows, the artists that impacted me, the national championships, the ballet, the governor's school, the college, the university, the presidency, the politics, the business, the radio stations, the publishings, the writings, the copyrights, the touring, the celebrities, the socialites, the sexuality, the philanthropy, the humanitarian, dance. I think that's pretty much everything. I think that's pretty much everything. So why she listened to me? I don't know. Why are you interested in me? I don't know. But I'm on that journey to try to figure that out. So, come along. All right, that's it.